I'm Susan Lewis, an educator, a mother, and someone who deeply cares about people. Know Thy Neighbor was born from a desire to understand, connect, and humanize what too often gets reduced to headlines or debate. Every week we sit down with open hearts to listen to the people whose lives have been shaped and sometimes broken by policies made far from their table. Because change doesn't start in politics, it starts right here with us. And before we can love our neighbor, we have to get to know them first. So welcome everyone. My name is Susan Lewis. We are here for the first episode of Know Thy Neighbor podcast. I am a daughter, I am a sister, I'm a single mother, I'm an educator, I'm a cisgendered white woman, and most importantly, someone who cares deeply about people. I've always been really curious. I was the kid always asking why. Why is this the role? Why does this matter? This doesn't matter. That same curiosity has really stayed with me my whole life. It's grown, deepened. It's really shaped how I move through the world and the work that I do. So Know Thy Neighbor was really born from that, a desire to understand, to connect, to humanize what too often gets reduced to headlines or debate. I've lived the impact of policy as a single mother, as a divorced woman, as an educator. I've been handed procedures that didn't serve the kids that were sitting in front of me. And it really sparked a fire in me to get to the table where those decisions and conversations were had, because lived experience should drive policy, not the other way around. So this podcast is rooted in really three things. It's focused on authenticity, real conversations, real people, no jargon, no talking down, no debate. Also, empathy is so critically important here, that we lead with care and centering the lived human experience. And directness, no fluff, no filler, just what needs to be said and what needs to be heard. So at its core, Know Thy Neighbor is about humanizing policies and politics, creating space and connection, truth, and the kind of storytelling that challenges us to do more than just hear. We're here to see, believe, and honor the stories and experiences that are shared. My hope is simple, that this podcast inspires you to lean in, even when it's uncomfortable. I'm scared it's going to be uncomfortable. So get uncomfortable with me. I invite you to do that. To stay curious, to open yourself to hearing the hard truths and seeing people behind the policies. You might just find an opportunity to examine your own beliefs, your own values, and maybe discover there's room for growth. I know that's the journey that I'm on. So I invite you to pull up a chair. Join me each week as we sit and listen to these stories, because knowing your neighbor is where empathy begins and change becomes possible. So thank you for being here. So I'd love to introduce my first guest, Dr. Isela Garcia. So I was going to have you send me a little bio, but I really, again, want this to be just an authentic conversation. And I would love for you to share what you feel is most important for the listeners to just know about you, a little bit of your background. And also, I would love for you to share why you said yes to being my first guest.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be your first guest. Let's see, where do I start? So, because you and I came together in early childhood education, I will start there. So, I've been in the field of early childhood education, working primarily with children up to the age of 8. Now it's 34 years. And I have worn many, many hats, as many of us who do work in early childhood do. I was a classroom teacher. I was actually an assistant teacher, classroom teacher, an administrator, and then a consultant. And I have written lots of things for programs and organizations that work on behalf of children and families. My priority has been working with families and children in the most extreme circumstances. So we're talking experiencing homelessness, having addiction, domestic violence, children with disabilities, and sometimes those things kind of come together in situations, unfortunately. And with kiddos who exhibit some, pretty serious behaviors given the trauma that they've experienced. So that's been my primary focus. And I've worked with many adults who actually lived those experiences as children. And I've also worked with mostly children from Black and Brown communities. Now, in terms of like who Isela is outside of work, I've I'm married. I've been with my husband for 35 years. So we've been together for a really long time. I do come from historical generational trauma. And so my husband and I waited 18 years to have our daughter. We didn't really, there wasn't ever a commitment to have children, but I knew for sure that if I ever made the decision to have a child, I had to make sure that I had healed from my prior experiences and trauma. And I think that was part of my work in early childhood because it helped me be able to understand myself better through all of the experiences I had with children and adults. I would often say when I was administrator, I learned how to be a good leader through 4-year-old children. Like they taught me how to be a good leader. And then our daughter, after we were together 18 years, we made the decision. I felt like I was healthy enough to have a baby, that I wouldn't repeat what was done to me as a child. And that's when Gia came. And Gia just turned 17 yesterday. And she is quite a remarkable human being. She is also neurodivergent. We all are. I'm neurodivergent, autism. I'm ADHD. My husband is autism and ADHD, and my daughter has autism and ADHD as well. And not only that, but she has a whole slew of issues in terms of digestive issues. She has, we've been trying to figure out what causes her pain in her digestion, and it's just been quite a road. So, yeah, that's my experience in terms of family and career.
Yeah. And so, how would you identify yourself and describe your family members for those who are listening?
Well, that's an interesting question because I'm often labeled Latina because I'm Mexican. My family is from Sonora, Mexico. I'm first generation. My dad was born in Mexico. My mom was a migrant worker, and I think because of ancestry.com, I think my great great grandmother was born in Mexico, but my great grandmother was born here in the United States because we were migrant workers and on that side of my family. And so we traveled between Texas, California, Arizona, and Nebraska for the agriculture. And so my mom did that all of her childhood and through high school. And then when she graduated, she found a job and no longer had to work in the fields any longer. And so the label given to me is Latina, but I've never aligned with it, which is really interesting. I always called myself a Chicana. And that was something that I just grew up with. And that is what resonates with me. But I've adopted Latina because it's a common term that's given to us.
Can you maybe describe for our listeners what maybe the difference is between those two?
Chicano is a word that actually comes from the United States, and it came up through a movement in the 60s and 70s, I believe. But see, where I grew up, there was a division, unfortunately, between those that were directly from Mexico. Those were like the Mexicans, and then there were the Chicanos who had already been here for a generation or so. And so it's weird because in that neighborhood, which was in South Phoenix, there was a division between those two populations of people. And because even though my dad he was born in Mexico, he came when he was 7. And so he leaned more into the Chicanos than he did the Mexicans. And so it's interesting when you think about how there's so much division even within
Yes.
the same ethnicity, right?
Ah,
Yeah.
interesting.
And it was just what I grew up with. I grew up hearing it. I grew up, that was just part of the language. And so that's what I resonated with. Now, my husband is Black. My husband originally comes from, well, within the United States, comes from his mom's side is from Mississippi. and dad is from the East Coast. I believe it's Boston. And he was a military kid. So his experience is very uniquely different than his family's background. And so my daughter is a biracial.
And
Mhm.
so when you think about just your own family makeup and the identities that you've either adopted or people have placed on you, how has it just kind of historically shown up? You shared a little bit about your own life, but even just within your marriage, before having a child, when you did have a child, how that's looked maybe through the journey of your daughter going through school and kind of that experience that you've had in terms of understanding how you've been treated, how policies have potentially informed any interactions that you've had in any of those spaces.
Well, we got together in high school. And this was during a time, this was back in the early 90s. And it was during a time when, I mean, we did see biracial marriages, but it wasn't as common. And for whatever reason, I lived near a military base. I actually still live near a military base. And so we did see a lot of white and Asian couples, but less black and white couples or black and Mexican couples. And I actually was disowned from my family for marrying my or being with my I hid my husband. Actually, when I was in high school, I hid him, and I hid him in when I first couple years of college, and then he joined the military, and so I decided to marry and move to Texas with him. And I will tell you that, being disowned from your family, and I, there was a story I'm going to share with you about. I told my family about him, and I remember taking him to my nana's house. So my nana is my grandmother, my nana, my tata, my grandmother, my grandfather. And my grandparents lived in South Phoenix, and it's a predominantly Black and Mexican area. And there was lots of crime and stuff that happened in that area, but we never locked the doors. Like, we never locked the front door except at night. People would just come in and out. There were lots of us who would stay there at a time. And so all my aunts and my tias and my tios were all living there except the ones that were married. So they were adults. And so there were always like 7, 8 people in and out of the house. So they knew I was coming over and I was going to bring my Black boyfriend. And we get off the car, and, I'm nervous. I have some, trepidation around this. So, but we go anyway. And I go to open the door and it's locked. It's never locked midday, ever. And so then I knocked on the door. My tata, my grandfather, opened the door, and he barely opened it. Like, he just barely opened it. And, I said hi to him, and he basically said to me that right now was not a good time in Spanish. And he shut the door on me. And like, this was the part of my family, because my trauma came mostly from my mom and my mom's side of the family, not my dad. This was my safe haven. This is where I went to for love, connection, and affection, and all of those things, because we were a close knit family, and I stayed holidays and vacations with them. And here's my grandfather who refuses to open the door for me. And so my dad he wasn't exactly excited that I was with my husband, but he never denied me. He didn't disown me. It was just the rejection from my grandfather. And my mom was the one who disowned me completely. So we moved to Texas because my husband's in the military, and the military base is predominantly, at least this base was predominantly Black and Hispanic folks. But the surrounding area was not. And it was during a time when, I'm telling you, we would go to dinner and there would be older white folks like sitting at dinner staring at us. We would be seated on the back end by the kitchen of restaurants. Sometimes we were not seated, for like, other people would come in and they would get seated before us. And so it was something that I never really thought about when we moved to Texas. I mean, granted, my family, that was a situation, but I didn't experience that publicly until we moved to Texas.
Did you ever have an experience where anybody ever called that out?
No, no. And, when we were driving to Texas, I, my husband was driving, and we weren't married at the time. We were still dating when he was in Texas. I think he was there for about a year before we got married. And one of the times we were taking the trip out there, a police officer pulled us over. And my husband knows the drill. He knows you sit, and even though he was in the military, he knows you don't move, you sit still, your hands stay on the steering wheel. Had an experience with police. Actually, a police officer, I'm going to sidestep here to share that story because these two stories come together. I was in my car in my mom's neighborhood going back to college because went to school in Tempe and she lived in Phoenix. And I got pulled over, and they told me it was because I had a busted tail light. And they had me get out of the car. And I had just come back from Vegas. And so my car was full of my suitcases and stuff like that. And so they had me get out of my car. They had me sit on the curb, and they went through my car and searched my luggage. They searched everything. And I think I was probably 21 at the time, and I was terrified. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know my rights. I didn't know that they couldn't do that. I didn't know any of those things. And so then fast forward, I'm in this car with my husband who knows the drill. And here I am in the same space of like, I don't know my rights. And we got questioned and interrogated in a way that now I recognize was not acceptable. But the way that he questioned me, he never took my name, but because I can be white, people might assume, especially in nighttime or evening time, that I'm white. I'm white passing, that's what it's called. And he was questioning my husband to make sure that I wasn't being harmed by him. And again, boyfriend, he wasn't my husband just yet. And so there was an interrogation of that to make sure that he wasn't hurting me.
What kind of conversation did you and your husband have after that experience? Like when you pulled away from that experience?
What I find interesting about my husband is that even now, when we talk about these things, I think it's such just a given. He doesn't question it in the way that I question it. Like once I address it and I go, did you notice, that really wasn't appropriate. Like if you were white, we would not have had this conversation. It's interesting because it's like, it just is the way that it is, Isela. I'm Black. And as a Black man, these are the rules that I have to live by. And I don't think he was consciously aware of these rules. They're passed down. They were passed down from his father, who was military as well. So passed down, and they're just adopted as the way that it is. And I think that's true within my culture as well. It's just I have a fiery personality that just wants to know why. And my husband's like, it just is. Just keep quiet, keep your head down, and keep going. Yeah. So and then when I got the ticket, because we were speeding, I got the ticket. He had put white woman like describing me. The ticket wasn't even about me, but I was the passenger in the car and he was interrogating us. And so I remember talking about like how wrong that was, but I didn't know well enough to know my rights. So it wasn't coming from there. It was coming from what it felt like to be treated and spoken to that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really kind of the heart of what this podcast for me is about. And you've really helped me on this journey just in knowing you for so many years at this point. You've really helped open my eyes to go beyond what I know in my lived experience of the world, which is as a white woman, right? To recognize not everybody has that same lived experience and that we need to have these conversations. People need to hear these real stories because whether it's passed down generationally, right? It's also being dictated. And also think about the way that the cops are being trained
Right.
and taught. That's being passed down, right? And I'm saying all of this without judgment. I think that's a really important thing that I want to speak to. I really want this to be a space where it lifts people's awareness to say, wow, other people have different experiences from me. I didn't realize that, and I want to know more about it. And so that's really, I just want to put that in here. I hear also a little bit about this idea of covert and overt kind of racism, sexism, even potentially, of just thinking about in those experiences of your own life within your own family. How much of it do you feel is covert versus overt? Because I think you probably have experiences with both, right?
Oh, geez. That's a really hard question. And the reason is because I think we sometimes have just become accustomed to the way that things are. And we don't really identify it. It's like from an outside observer, someone who this is foreign to them, this understanding that people are going to treat you the way that they're going to treat you. And it's like, and coming from your lens, for example, your lens, you're like, why would you let that happen? Like, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you don't know that you can? You don't know that there is that you can speak up or that you should because it just has always been this way. I had another experience. I was 19-ish, 20. I was for the first time I'd ever gone to DC, and I was taking the Amtrak between DC and I forget where I was going, but I was going someplace out there. And I had gotten first class ticket on the Amtrak, and my white friend and I had gotten, but she was behind or she wasn't with me. We had gotten separated. We were getting to the train, and I went to get into first class, and the person who takes the ticket or was standing there, I don't know what they're called, but he told me that I was in the wrong train. I was in the wrong part of the train, that I needed to go to the back. And I remember standing there confused, but and he wouldn't even let me say the words, but I have a ticket for first class. And there was a sign that said first class. He wouldn't even let me say the words. He kept cutting me off and saying, no, you need to go back there. And then my white friend came behind me and she goes, oh, she was like, oh, you found it. You found it. And then he looked and he took her ticket. And then he looked down and he goes, oh, and then he took mine after she started to get on the train. And I remember feeling so dumbfounded. There was that question like, did that just happen? Am I making that up? Was that about what I look like and who I like? In the beginning, you don't even know how to process that. So it just is what it is.
And then from his perspective, I wonder how much awareness he had in that moment,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's another important thing to bring up is that it's easy to call out these experiences, right? But I think we also need to recognize people do this stuff without even knowing it. So I will just speak from my own experience. I had a grandfather who was a very outwardly racist, very racist growing up. And my mom put boundaries around that very, very early on in life, that was not allowed to be spoken around us as children. There were things that, because I had a friend growing up who was a Black girl, and I remember talking about my friend, and somehow it came up that she was Black, and my grandfather told me I wasn't allowed to play with her. And my mom very quickly squashed that. So I have early recollections of standing up, speaking out against those types of things, and also witnessing. And just because my grandfather, things slipped over the years, right? He was around for a long time. That is very overt, right? That is not covert. But I think that there are people that have been in families. If my mom hadn't said anything,
Right.
what would I have learned? And what would I have adopted? And so I think about that. And again, I just want to, for listeners, to just take a moment of reflection and just think about your own experiences of maybe where and I can speak for myself that there have been times this happened just not too long ago. And I very vividly, in the moment, had a realization where I was walking down the street. It was late at night. There was a group of men, different races. They were a diverse group, but a group of men walking towards me. And I very quickly pulled out my phone
Mhm.
and I acted like I was talking to somebody. And again, in that moment, I had just that realization of like, wow, where's that coming from? Because we do this stuff very often without even thinking about it. It's very unconscious for us. And so, again, I just really want to raise the level of that conscious thought in many of these experiences, whether you witness it, participate in it, again, just raising a level of awareness.
Well, I think you bring up a really important point about what you're exposed to, but we're exposed to so many things. And it was part of the agenda to show Black men as, people that were savages, I think was the word that was used. And so if you were witness to that, or you have family who have certain beliefs, it's like those permeate in the foundation of our experiences of life. And so it is unconscious until you become aware that you are actually doing those things. And that's what becomes really frustrating when we're having these difficult conversations, because people will say, oh, no, I'm not racist, or oh, no, I'm not all of these things. Yeah, you might not believe that you are, but there are some deeply rooted beliefs that come from the culmination of your experiences that you're just not aware of.
I'll be the first person to share an uncomfortable story for listeners that are here with us. And this is something that you helped illuminate for me just recently. We were having a conversation just about my personal frustration around what's happening in our country right now. And just, I feel like I'm stepping into this activist role. I'm using my voice. I'm trying to be an advocate. And I feel like it's falling, people aren't hearing, right? And I'm feeling really frustrated by that. And you very lovingly and kindly just said, well, that's kind of how Black and Brown women have been feeling forever.
Mhm.
And I had this wave of embarrassment come over me. And when you said it, and I think simultaneously a wave of guilt that I haven't experienced that before. But those are the moments that we need to have. Those are the moments that we need to be willing to look in a mirror and say, oh shit, you're right.
Mhm.
I'm really sorry. I didn't recognize that. And I own that,
Mhm.
right? And I honor and believe your truth, right? That you had, that's what your experience has been like. And not dismiss it, because I think that's what often happens is people say, oh, well, I don't believe that. And so that part is really, I think, again, an important piece for me here is to be willing to sit with the discomfort, be willing to lovingly call each other out, call each other in, actually, is really what it is. It's about calling each other in, helping us see where we have opportunities for growth and where we have opportunities to support one another and see the world a little differently. Because, and I do want to shift us to this. So, your experiences of life to this point, you've shared a little bit of that. How do things feel different for you now with what's happening in our country right now?
Oh, given what's happening in our country,
Yeah, I know that's a big question. I know.
all of that's illuminated tenfold.
Yeah.
I think that for so long it's been an undercurrent, right? We've pretended, I say we as a collective, we in the United States have pretended that racism no longer exists, that all of these isms no longer exist. At least people like to pretend that they are figments of our imagination.
We had civil rights, it was fixed.
It was fixed. That's right. We have all of these systems in place. And so we have that's DEI was part of what needed to be created because of bias. And I think the notion that those things have disappeared is ridiculous. You know, And so what's happening is we are seeing sort of, again, the culmination of these ideologies come to surface. And it's a huge reckoning, I think, is what's happening right now. So, those of us who are Black and Brown, we have known all along that the system wasn't built for us. Okay. And not just us, but people of color, marginalized communities. So, members of the LGBTQIA community, we've got folks with disabilities, we've got like the system wasn't built for us. Right. But you know where I think the real fight is, the real battle? I think the battle is among white people. And the reason why I think the battle is among white people is because in the last several years, I would say since COVID, and maybe even prior to this to some degree, but since COVID, with the onset of programs, apps like TikTok, people have started to connect to others that they wouldn't otherwise connect with. So, like rural Alabama somewhere, right? Connecting with somebody in DC about something like a common experience. So maybe it is becoming aware that I might be autistic. Holy schmoly. Like I have, oh my goodness, I never even considered that I might be autistic. Or, this is trauma healing and what it looks like for us. Oh my goodness, I can relate to your trauma, even though you're Black and I'm white, you're from an urban area and I'm from a rural area. And all of a sudden, these people are creating community and they're connecting and they're getting to know one another at a deeper level. And that, like you, at the onset of this, you said that's where empathy is born. And so we have these people now where we have connections happening with people that are unlike them, but have maybe some similarities, some things that they can connect with. And now we've got white people who are connecting with people of color, with people of different communities. And now we've got this whole political climate emerging with very, we're divided, right? Big time. But these folks have been exposed to people that they actually are like, they're not so bad. We connected this way. And now we have divisions between families because the daughter who's now part of a community online who they, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, mom and dad, I don't believe that way anymore. What do you mean you don't believe that way? We raised you to know and to always vote this way or to know or to believe whatever. And now folks are starting to recognize that there are other people, other ways, other experiences, and they're starting to see themselves in others. And I think the big division right now, even though we're the target, we're being targeted, all of us Latinos are being targeted, our trans people are being targeted. Yes, we are being targeted, but I think the fight really is among white folks.
So, what advice would you give us?
Use your privilege. Use your privilege. And I have said this on my own social media platforms. I have said Black and brown folks need to stay home. You need to stay home. And I know protesting is so important. Make those phone calls. Be aware of where you spend your money, right? But we do not need you protesting out on the streets because they're waiting for us. The way that they're going to respond to Black and brown people protesting is very different than the way they are responding to white folks protesting. And that is just the way that it is. It's one of those things that I said earlier, it just is what it is. So we need to stay home. And I think white folks need to be the ones out there protesting, using their privilege, speaking out, recognizing that what's happening right now, we are at a cusp of something that could really, really go south real fast.
I wonder if you can speak a little bit to, so this has been part of why I have created this space and also part of the work that I've been doing is I recognize the privilege I have as a white woman. And I feel safer, I think, than a lot of folks that might feel to even post online or speak about this. I really am being mindful though, and this is something that's in the back of my mind. I don't want to have a white savior moment here where I'm coming in to save the Black and brown folks. I wonder if there's anything that you could say to us, maybe around how to really toe the line there and be aware of our intentions.
Yeah, that is a hard question. And I don't think it has to do with saviorism when you are out saying that this is what all people deserve. It really is coming from raising the expectation of who we are as a nation. That are we really this as a nation when we look at the mass deportations that are happening right now and the way that people like the just the notion just to be really the notion that people are just going to be kindly deported to the country where they originated from, that is so foreign to me because historically when we look at deportation centers that have been in existence prior to this time, there are no rules. There are no rules about caring for people to ensure that they're getting fed, that they're getting water, that they get like there are no rules. So literally they're put into a room and left there. And it's inhumane. And the fact that people I'm trying to understand, are we ignoring that this is happening? Is it too uncomfortable? So we're not even like, don't tell me about it? Or do people know and not doing anything because they're here illegally? Like, I don't understand where the breakdown is. And so this is a basic human nature. It's just humanity. We take care of each other. We see ourselves in one another. So I think using your privilege to speak out and say, this is unacceptable. That's not about saviorism. That's saying, who are we as a nation? And is this what we really want to be like? How are we being inclusive of people with disabilities? How are we ensuring that they're getting a fair chance at life? Like, that's not just,
Yeah.
that's really about raising the bar and the expect, not even raising the bar. Good God, it's just basic needs.
I'd say that's bare minimum. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it's one of those things too that I've just in some of my circles that I've been part of, and this is just anecdotally from other white people that I've heard, mostly older white people, which I think is interesting. It's all about trying to get back to where we were. I think it's like, oh, we need to like bring it back to where we were. Things were good. It's really also recognizing we need to reconceptualize a lot of things that were happening because what even though we had some protections in place, there were civil, like we had rights that have passed and have been historic, doesn't mean that they all were serving maybe the purpose they were designed to serve. I'm just curious if you have anything to say about where we are and where we're heading, that it's not necessarily, and I'm curious what your perspective is. Is it about going back to where we were in a, I'm
I don't even
using
know
air
what
quotes,
that
safe
means,
space?
Susan.
Yeah.
I honestly don't even know what that means. When people say
Yeah.
go back to
Oh,
what?
yes. But
To
I think that's where they're missing the experience of people, right? In their minds, having these laws in place and having DE, let's just use DEI as an example, having that in place fixed it. I'm using air quotes again for folks, right? And now that we're taking it away, it's like, oh, it's broken now. It wasn't necessarily fixed because we had that policy. And I think that's the bigger piece is helping people understand that even though we had policies in place, they weren't always enacted in a way that actually benefited people. And I'm wondering if you can share maybe an example from your own personal life, like educationally, anything that might connect that for listeners.
Well, I think that the systems that are put into place have been put into place to support, well, some seemingly so, for to make experiences more equitable, right? And so with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know what's interesting about this? And I don't know if you and I have ever had this conversation, but if I'm going to just tell a little quick story, and I want you to just imagine what you see in your mind when I tell this story. So you're going to take a trip, okay? And you're in New York or Washington, D.C. Let's just say you're in the city, one of the big cities, okay? And you're going to take a quick trip and you need to grab a taxi. You're going to grab a taxi and an Uber. I know we would, instead of an Uber or Lyft, you're going to take a taxi, okay? So you're going to take a taxi, you grab your luggage, you're running to the taxi, out to the curb and you wave someone down. He comes or they come to the car and come out of the car and put your luggage in the back into the trunk and you get in and you rush off to the airport. You're in a hurry. So you get there, you get to the airport, you're running in And then you realize there's a delay in your flight. And so you decide to go to the restaurant and just hang out before, because it's like a 4 hour delay. You'll be sitting there for a while. And you're a people watcher. So you like to watch people and see what they're doing. And there's happens to be a couple who's sitting at a table or nearby, and they are celebrating. And so people are talking and there's lots of things happening. So you're paying attention to them. And it turns out that you learn that it's their anniversary. And so they're celebrating their anniversary. They're going to go off to on a trip together. And so they bring you in because you're sitting by yourself. And so you're engaging, you're talking, and they're having a good old time. And so you just have a pleasant time. And then you realize you got to get over to your gate. So you run across and you go to your gate, and the captain is standing outside, and the flight attendants are there, and they welcome you. They say hi, and you get onto the flight, and you have a seat. You get ready to go on your flight. So I want you, and this is the quick, short version of this for listeners, especially. When I said you were getting on a cab, who was driving? Who was driving, right? Was it a male? Was it a female? Was he from the United States? Right. And then you get to the airport and you see this couple who are celebrating their anniversary. Is it a heterosexual couple? Did you think male, female? Did you think white? Did you think a same sex couple? Could have been two women married. When you ran over to your flight and you saw the captain standing there, was the captain a male? Was he white? Was he black? Was he young? Was he old? What story did you create in your mind? What did the flight attendants look like? Right. And so we are completely unaware, right, that we do this, but we naturally do this because that's how bias is formed. That's how, yeah, our bias is formed quickly because our brain makes shortcuts between information that we've gathered over the course of our lives. And so we automatically go to that place. So DEI, right? If there are two people that are equally qualified, and you go, well, no, that's a position for a white man. You don't even think of that consciously. Unconsciously, you just go, well, he's the one that's going to fit for this position. It doesn't have to do with one being way less qualified and we're going to hire this person because he's black. We have to fit a quota. It's not that at all. It's that there's so much bias and we're unaware of our biases.
And you've talked about already how that's been passed on generationally, right? This
Yes.
has just been passed on generationally. And until we have somebody like you did with your family, that you said, I'm not having a child until I work through some of the trauma that I need to heal for myself so I can show up as a better mom, right? And I want to encourage folks who are listening to think about this in terms of recognizing our own bias, where we're never going to eliminate it or get rid of all of our bias. That's just, we won't. I know you and I both have done a lot of work around this. We still have our own biases. The most important thing I think about this, though, is recognizing when it happens for yourself, having self-awareness, and also recognizing and lovingly call people in when it's happening, when you witness it.
Yeah, and I think the way that you start to do that, honestly, one of the best ways to move in this direction is to become really present.
Mhm.
That's mindfulness. It's really recognizing in the moment, okay, why did I just do that? What am I thinking about that? What are my actions and behavior given the circumstances that just occurred? That reflective piece, but being super mindful of how you are approaching situations, I think is a critical part of this. We can't on our own uncover our biases. This is why community is also important, so that we can have these types of conversations and call people in. And really, it's hard recognizing, because you're like, I love all people. You're like, yeah, but what you said right there was a microaggression. What you said right there was something that you may not have considered, but you're actually insulting them in a very passive sort of way. Yeah.
So, what do you wish people understood about like the emotional labor that being a Chicano woman or raising a biracial child or being in an interracial marriage, being in systems that weren't designed for you?
I I think more than anything, I'm always willing to teach because I'm just a natural teacher, but people need to do their own work. Stop, we're in education. And so what often would happen if you have one Latina or Latino working there, or you have a Black person working there, you might say, hey, what's your experience? Because you're Black, share your experience. What should we do? Or be a part of this committee because you're going to represent the entire race. I that happens more often than you think. And the sad thing, because I've been asked a million times over to be a part of a committee because of the fact that I'm Latina, they don't really want to know my opinion. They just want me to be sitting at the table. There's a difference between an invitation to sit and an invitation to share your experience and contribute.
And so that's part of DEI that is not done well.
Yes.
That is not inclusion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so I think people need to do their own research. You need to do your own reading. There are lots of great places and spaces and books and workshops to help you learn more about the history and the true history of what has happened to marginalized communities in the United States.
So I'm curious, what do you want listeners to take away from our conversation today and your story? What kind of parting words or reflections might you offer them?
Everybody has a story. And when we can come to the place of being open hearted without judgment, and judgment is the hard thing, like learning to have an experience with somebody without judging them. For me, that's the opposite of judgment, is being open hearted and being curious. And open your heart and just wonder about how their experiences have shaped not only how they show up in the world, but how the world has treated them. And that would explain why we might not want to share or be the one to teach you how to and what to do to combat things like racism and biases. And so be curious, ask questions, go research some of those questions yourself, but really with an open heart, listen to the stories of others and recognize that every story is valid. Every story is just as important as yours.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your story. Your story does matter. Your story deserves to be heard. So thank you for sharing it. And to everybody listening, thank you for being here. I really hope this conversation didn't just inform you, but it moved you to stay curious, to stay open, and truly see the people around you walking through the grocery store, sitting next to you at a red light, even living next door to you. Because the truth is, we're all carrying stories that most will never know about. And change doesn't actually start with politics. It starts here with us, when we choose to stop looking away and be willing to really see and hear each other. So let's take the time, ask the questions, listen deeper, lean in, because only then can we truly begin to love thy neighbor. So I ask you to listen, to share, talk about it, because these stories don't just deserve to be heard, they deserve to be remembered. Until next time, please take care of yourself and your neighbor.